Well, hello and welcome to week one of Becoming a Good News Church. Throughout the next few months, we're going to be looking in our sermon series on Sunday mornings at what it means to become a good news church. But we're also going to be looking at this in our house groups, and we're going to be thinking about what it means to be good news as a church in Woodbridge. And I'm really excited about what God has got in store for us as a church as we work through some of these different questions that we're going to be looking at from the study guide by Graham Tomlin, but also as we pray about this and think about this as a church together.
Here's a question for you. What's the matter with people these days? Speaking as someone who works in a church and is interested in sharing the good news of Jesus, and we're thinking about how we can be good news, what is the matter with people? Why aren't they interested in what we've got to say? Why is it that most of the world, 95% of Woodbridge, passes the door rather than is interested in coming in? Doug and I have been sort of talking about some of these things, we've been reading about some of these sort of things. There are conferences that try to talk about it. And we want to just ask a question at this point in time. What's top of people's priorities? What is it that really motivates them in life? What are they attracted to? What do they want to do with their lives? And we've got one or two theories about what that might be. We meet people who seem to measure everything by, does this make me happy? Or that sense of, is there an experience? We've got a part of my family where instead of buying lots of little presents at Christmas, instead of thinking about what they might do from a list, they club together and each person in that arm of the family will get one experience. And some of them might be things they do together. So they might decide to have a whole day playing golf. I wish I was in that part of the family. But anyway, that sense of an experience is a better thing to buy for them, because that might make them happy. And, well, whether it actually adds anything to their character or the rest of life, you might want to work that out, to talk about that. But what is it that's people's priorities these days? Is it that sense of just wanting to be happy, just wanting to get by, just wanting to cope beyond work? What is it that people are asking today?
It was about 15 years ago that there was a man called Strobel who decided to go to the lengths of finding out whether or not Jesus really was who he said he was. Now, Strobel was an atheist, and he was so convinced that he could disprove the resurrection of Jesus that he took in all of the different sources in the hope of proving actually that Jesus wasn't who he said he was, that Jesus didn't rise from the dead. So he took in the biblical sources, he took in the Jewish sources, and he took in the Roman sources, and he pulled them all together. And what Strobel found by the end of his case for Christ was that actually it would take more faith to continue to be an atheist than it would be to be a follower of Jesus. Now that was 15 years ago, and it's fair to say that actually times have changed a little bit. People don't seem to be any longer asking those kinds of questions as, did Jesus really rise from the dead? We live in what we call a postmodern world. And what that means is actually people decide what is true for themselves. So increasingly we see things like New Age stuff, we see things like New Age spiritualities, because that's viewed as, well, you know what, that's okay for me. And one of the many criticisms of Christianity now is, well, if that's okay for you, that's fair enough, but I'm not going to believe that. I'm happy with my worldview. I don't really care if it's true or not. It's true for you, it might not be true for me. And so one of the great challenges that we have as Christians is to be relevant in a world where people have probably stopped asking some of the questions that we want them to be asking, such as, is Jesus who he says he was? People probably aren't really asking that question anymore. So we as a church need to be provocative in the way in which we get people to ask those questions and to return to asking those questions.
Here's a thought for you. Just right back at the start of the church, there was a crowd of people And they were asking one of those questions about, is it true, what's going on? But it landed them in a different place. So when they asked that question, it meant that they gathered together, it meant that they prayed together, it meant that they shared together, it meant that they... Well, it talks about communion, and there's a little bit of a debate about whether that's just about bread and wine or whether it's a bit more than that. But they met together. But we know from other sources that they did more than that. We know that they were looking out for the kids who were just abandoned by their families. And because of what they knew about Jesus and what they knew about God, they just picked them up and start caring for them. There were widows and orphans who were being cared for. There was something about the way they were living their lives, beyond what they did in their religious duty, that was attractive to other people. And daily, people were being added to their numbers. That's the phrase that's used there in the beginning of Acts. Daily, they were so attractive that daily people were coming to ask those questions. They were being provoked into those things.
I love rugby, and one of my favourite rugby players is Jason Robinson. And Jason Robinson he came from a pretty deprived background. He suffered domestic abuse when he was growing up, and that led to him having a bit of a colourful teenage years sort of period in his life. He managed to become a professional rugby player, but he'd still go out getting drunk, and he'd sleep around, and he would do all manner of things, but none of those things were making him happy. And at the same time as when he was playing for the rugby club Wigan, he had a teammate called Inga Tawingawala. Now, Inga Tawingawala was a Christian, and the way that Jason Robinson describes it was that through the fog of his own despair, he couldn't help but notice this guy. You know, Inga Tawingawala was very different. You know, he wouldn't drink, he wouldn't smoke, he wouldn't swear, he wouldn't go out to all the parties that all the other rugby players were going, but he would actually sit in the changing rooms at times and pray for them. And Jason Robinson said, there was just something about this guy that I wanted to have. It would later turn out the thing that he wanted was Jesus.
Graham Tomlin, who wrote The Provocative Church that we're studying, and we're getting to the stage now where we're going to ask you to turn to the questions at the back of chapter 1, said this: make your Christianity attractive. Make good men wish that it was true, and then show them that actually it is. And it's with that spirit that we want to approach those questions, that sense of balancing truth and attractiveness.